Welcome everybody to the Southern Region Advisory Council meeting. We call this meeting to order. Today is September the 5th, and we're starting just a few minutes after 6 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So thank you for everyone being here at the DWR office. We are in Richfield, Utah, and we're also streaming it live on YouTube. We want to apologize for some technical glitches we have with our camera audio system. You may want to look away from the screen if it's glitching too much, but you should be able to hear us just fine on the audio. So we're going to go ahead with our meeting here. This is a public forum meeting. We want everyone to be able to express their opinions and proposals on management of wildlife in our state. This advisory council will consider everyone's ideas, opinions, and proposals and report to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not this council, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. At this time, we'll recognize one of our board members from Wildlife Board that is here with us, one of our newest members of the Wildlife Board. Welcome, Paula Richmond. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So happy to have board members here in attendance. I've got a statement here I'll read real quick. We all care about our ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. We encourage all to express their opinion to do so. However, we ask that everyone respect opposing views on the issues being discussed, but appreciate the audience here, keeping their emotions in check, allowing all individuals to freely express their opinions. Appropriate conduct will provide smooth meeting flow, allowing everyone to listen, digest, and address all concerns, opinions, and proposals. If any inappropriate behavior persists, we may ask you to leave the meeting. Keep in mind also with the microphone system we are using, it does pick up most conversations. Any side conversations, talking over someone else makes it very difficult for anyone to hear online. So let's go through. We have 4 new RAC members from the Southern Region Council, 3 of which are in attendance today. So I'd like everybody on the RAC to introduce themselves. Those that are new, tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, and the position which you're representing on the RAC. We'll start with those here in attendance and then go to online. Russell?
Me first. I'm Russ Gardner from Enterprise, Utah. I represent Ag. I don't know how I got this call, but anyway, I did and hope that I can be of value here in some way to wildlife.
What do you do professionally, Russell?
I have a herd of cows and grandkids and a farm that I chase around every day, and I enjoy it immensely.
Thank you.
Chuck Chamberlain, representing the Forest Service out of Cedar City.
My name is Mike Grant. Little about myself, avid sportsman of public land my entire life. I'm here primarily for a voice of all the sportsmen, and I'm a safety facilitator at a local coal mine here in the region. So a little about myself. I'm here, and hopefully I can dedicate myself for all the sportsmen.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Austin Atkinson, new chairman of this advisory council. I live in Cedar City and represent public at large.
Bryant Johnson, public at large. I grew up a dairy farmer. I work in law enforcement currently, and my true passion is sportsman, hunting and stuff.
Dan Fletcher, representing Bureau of Land Management, Cedar City.
Merlin King, represent agriculture, Bicknell.
We've also got Chad, Riley, and Tammy. We'll go in that order online, joining us virtually.
Chad Utley, St. George, represent public at large.
Riley Roberts, Tropic, Utah, sportsman.
Is that all you're going to say? County Pearson, Minersville, Beaver County Commissioner. I'm the elected official position, I guess.
Thank you, everyone. I think that covers everyone who's in attendance today.
We're expecting Bart to join us at some point. We'll have to watch and let him introduce himself when he gets to.
That sounds good. Okay, welcome to all the DWR staff that is here, especially those that have provided presentations. This is a semi-hybrid virtual in-person meeting. So a lot of the DWR staff has provided the proposals and the videos online previously, which we've been instructed to watch, and we've received public feedback as well. There is DWR staff here and virtual to answer any questions we may have. Those that are attending here in person, any members of the public, have the opportunity to fill out a green comment card and pass that to us, and we will take that at that time for that specific agenda item. Those that are watching on YouTube should have already provided their public comments online when the DWR announced this meeting and provided the online proposals to view. There will not be any presentations made here today. You should have watched those previously. So with that, we will continue with the agenda. All the council members have the agenda. We need to approve the agenda for today and minutes from our past meeting. Need a motion on that too.
I'll move that we accept the agenda and the minutes from the last meeting.
Verlin moves to accept. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Dan seconds that. Any discussion? Probably not needed. All in favor indicate here present. Unanimous online. Chad, Riley.
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
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 Unanimous. The agenda is approved, minutes are approved. Okay, now the fun part. Agenda number 3, the Wildlife Board meeting update. I'm going to go back to Wildlife Board meetings and provide some updates since that's the last time we had a RAC meeting. So if we go back to the June 8th Wildlife Board meeting, there was a motion made to approve the wild turkey plan as presented by the division, and that passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the upland game recommendation as presented. That also passed unanimously. Under the waterfowl rule and swan hunt recommendations, there was a motion made to approve the amended recommendation, making the take of a trumpet or swan legal, but the possession illegal. That motion failed. There was a follow-up motion to I move that if the quota reaches 10 trumpeter swans taken, then the public shooting grounds in Bear River Bird Refuge will close. That motion also failed. In the end, on this agenda item, there was a motion made to approve the division's original recommendations as they were presented on the swan hunting, and that passed unanimously. There was also a motion to accept the live game birds rule amendments as presented. That passed. There was a motion to approve the collection, importation, and possession rule amendments, and that also passed unanimously. There was a motion made to deny the CWMU variance request until after the CWMU committee makes a recommendation and the variance can go through that process. And that passed with a tiebreaker by the chairman. There was also a motion to approve the translocation management plan for desert tortoise as presented by the division, and that passed unanimously. And then for your information, the election of the board chair was Randy Dirth as chairman and Gary Nielsen as vice chair. That's how that meeting ended. Then there was a follow-up meeting right after the orientation for new members in August. So the wildlife board meeting on August 17th, the shorter agenda. There was a motion made to accept the audit as presented by the division, and that passed unanimously. And then the last one was a motion to approve the export permit allocation. That would be for the following years, and that passed unanimously as well. So that's a report on wildlife board meetings that have happened since we last met. And I think we can go to a regional update now.
We have questions on any of the board.
Can you remind me, what was the swan, the original? That's 3 of the motions that Tim held and the original one.
That was,
Yeah, so the question on the Swan original presentation by the division was to basically take out the trumpeter allowance at all and change everything to a tundra swan in the rules and in the regulation, and therefore make it illegal to harvest the trumpeter swan. So it would be cited, as far as I understand, and you could not take a trumpeter swan. All that check-in and all that remain the same, but that's how they accept it.
And that will be approached from an education standpoint, or at least initially from a law enforcement standpoint. Paul, anything you want to add to that?
Officer discretion will be used heavily depending on the circumstance.
Okay, any other questions?
so I've got a question on the wild turkey proposal. I'm just trying to catch up to understand what was that?
The wild turkey was the update to the plan, and that was going through everything from how we did spring hunts to fall hunts, how permits were allocated, depredation issues would be taken care of, and the plan was presented, and that's what was passed on and voted.
It wasn't a huge change. It was some tweaks. Overall, but pretty similar to the way we've been managing turkeys. And that plan's available online, and I can give you a copy of it. Okay.
Regional update.
Yep, here comes so the regional update from our wildlife section. So the Pando aspen clone-up by Fish Lake is a really big deal to some people. And it's something that there's a group that's really passionate about Pando and cares a lot about it. And we along with the Forest Service, work to protect that clone. As part of that, we put some collars on 7 deer that were actually collared in that.
We've lost sound again, guys.
Can you hear us now? Okay, we'll continue. So elk committee meetings have been happening around the region, and we'll see those plans updated in the November RAC. Pronghorn classification looks good. Good fawn numbers, and pronghorn look healthy. Continuing to see some mortality on our Zion bighorn sheep. We've had 6 of the collared animals that have died this year. We did have a small outbreak of blue tongue, and then lion predation are the highest. We also had 1 roadkill, and I think we had 2 each, 2 from blue tongue, 2 from lion predation, a roadkill, and I can't remember what the one that fell off a cliff, which that's just natural selection with bighorn sheep. So. Been working on putting collars on bears for continuing to monitor those populations, and then we have our upcoming chukar and pheasant hunts with the youth hunts that will come before those. So information on those is in the guidebook. Our Utah prairie dog crew has been really busy this summer with a wet winter and a good spring. Our counts were about 4 times what they were last year, which is good because they've been declining for several years. So, typical with the dynamics of rodent populations, when they bounce back in a big way. And that happened this year. They've trapped and translocated over 1,000 prairie dogs. We'll probably get over 2,000 by the end of the trapping season, or get close to that. Also, you know, the wet spring, our brood counts on the Parker Mountain for sage grouse were really high, the highest we recorded in the last several years. So that bodes well for sage grouse populations as well. Luckily, no new avian influenza cases in California condors, and they have started vaccinating the condors for that. Zion deer hunters, we still have our non-lead program going, and you can get a free box of non-lead ammo if you have a deer tag on the Zion. We're working on pica surveys, which are really cool little animal that lives up above tree line and talus slopes. I'm actually going to go do one of those surveys on the Fish Lake tomorrow. And then we had a bat night at Mammoth Cave that we had good attendance at recently. Our aquatic section, let's skip that one. That one was supposed to be, that one will come up later. So black crappie populations in Gunlock have just exploded. And so our aquatics crew has been taking advantage of that. They've been moving black crappie to several other bodies of water. Jackson Flats received over 1,200, White Hollow Reservoir just over 500, Lay Hill Pond just there in Cedar City over 500, some of the Fairlawn Pond, and then the Willow Springs Pond, which is a brand new community fisheries and Enterprise has got 380. So if you have kids that like to fish and want them to catch a lot of fish, Gunlock Reservoir is really good for crappie right now. So it's a good place to take kids fishing. Our Washington County field office is really busy as always with a lot of their sampling, from spine days to the reservoirs for smallmouth bass, looking at temperature and all sorts of information on the rivers. They've implemented their flow plan and their pump back system. If you don't, the water system in Washington County is amazing. They can pump water back and forth between the different reservoirs. And most of that is to keep temperatures right for the endangered or the threats fish populations in the Virgin River. It's a great partnership between us and the Washington County Water Conservancy District. Let's go on to the next one, Adam. They have an annual photo contest with the Virgin River. They put out a calendar every year. So if you're interested in photography, there's information about that online. We've been monitoring the Escalante River, kind of in that really remote area from Boulder down to Lake Powell. Least jump population monitoring out in the West Desert, and then continuing to work on the Washington County HCP for desert tortoises. I think let's go on to the next one, Adam. So our habitat section. So the bridge out of Bicknell has been installed, and it looks really cool. And it will allow access to a lot of upland game habitat for pheasants on Bicknell Bottoms, and we've been working with the county on some flood assessments down there. We're replacing the fence at Indian Peaks. We're working on we're meeting pretty heavily right now with UDOT on some projects for crossings. If you remember, the legislature allocated, I think, $20 million so that we're using that then pairing with federal dollars to get some wildlife crossings in place. So we're working on Highway 89, I-70, and SR 18 to improve wildlife crossings there. Fire rehab on the Thompson Ridge fire, which is on the Beaver. We have fires can be really good and sometimes bad. They're always good for big game. Sometimes they're really bad for fish. This one seems to be just a good fire. It burned up in some really heavily timbered areas. We had some minor impacts on our fish populations, but that fire will do, pay dividends for big game, over the next 20 or 30 years. And then lots of other rehab projects through WRI that are kicking off in the region. Our outreach section, we had to cancel our mountain goat viewing on the Tushers because the roads weren't open to get up to where the where the goats hang out. We still had snow drifts closing the roads there. A little more information on the bat viewing event at Mammoth Cave. There they caught a total of 38 bats of 3 different species. Dedicated hunters finally slowing down. The outreach crew is really busy as we approach the archery hunt, and we had a lot of donation of hours, and then also a lot of projects that people cut out on. And then another thing coming up to keep in mind is the kokanee salmon viewing. There'll be a formal event on September 30th up at Fish Lake, but Nick, when will they start coming in?
They're starting now.
They're starting, so anytime between now and the middle of October,
Yeah.
they go up there along the boardwalk, and it's another really cool thing to take kids to do. Those salmon are colored up just as bright red as they can be, and the males are kind of, fight with each other to find the best spot. It's a fun thing to go see. Law enforcement. So we're losing our Salina District Officer, Julie Sabatis, who's been a really good officer for us, has accepted a position out of state, really moving back to get closer to family. So it's hard to fault Julie for that. We're down our Kane County, West Washington County, and West Iron and Salina districts are currently open. And then our canine officer in the region, along with his dog, recently won first place in a state canine tracking competition. We have 5 canine officers spread across the state. They're in really high demand, from search and rescue to, finding evidence and all sorts of things. They do a lot. Anything to add to that, Paul? That's it. So, okay. I think that might be it. Let's double check. I think that's all I have. Any questions for me on what's going on in the region?
Okay, back to you. Okay, thank you. We'll move on with our agenda tonight. We've got the 2024 fishing recommendations. And I believe we have Mr. Craig Walker, the Chief of Fisheries, on with us tonight, joining virtually. Welcome, Craig. Would you like to provide any updates or any clarification that we might need since the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to provide a few additions and some clarification on both action items tonight. First, before we get to the spearfishing regulation changes, I'll just introduce myself, Craig Walker, Assistant Aquatic Section Chief over Sportfish for the state of Utah. Specifically regarding the spearfish regulation changes, we're recommending that the suggested regulation changes be amended to include the addition of 2 new community fishing waters, the pond at Poulter Preserve in West Haven and the new Roosevelt Community Fishery. Although both ponds aren't scheduled to open until 2024, we are proposing their addition to the list of community waters now. That prevents us from having to go back to the RACs and Wildlife Board for an emergency regulation change to add them after they open to the public. So that regulation change that the DWR is formally proposing now for the 2024 guidebook cycle include 1, the spearfishing regulation changes that you all saw in our presentation, and 2, the addition of the 2 new community fisheries that I mentioned tonight.
Thank you, Craig. We'll open it up to questions from the RAC members. Any questions for Craig?
So my understanding, Craig, is that we didn't make any other changes to the guidebook other than the spearfishing and the addition of those waters. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chuck.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? All right, seeing none, we'll go to comments we received online.
So on this, we had 2, one that strongly agreed and one that neither agreed nor disagreed. So good support overall, and good support from the groups that represent fishermen across the state. I know, Chad, you're kind of our our fishing expert on the RAC. Anything you'd like to add particular to this agenda item?
There we go. No, not at all. We support this. Seem like good changes to me.
Thank you, Chad. I have no public comment cards here in the room, so we'll open up for any other RAC discussion.
I support it. I think it's good. Good changes.
Okay, no clarification needs. Let's call for a motion. I'd like to make a motion.
I'll motion that we approve the proposals as submitted by the division.
So Chad makes the motion to accept as presented by the division,
I'll second that motion.
seconded by Mike. Any discussion on the motion? Not needed.
That includes the 2 extra waters, right?
Correct.
Okay, I'll call for a vote. Do signal here in the room. All in favor? Chuck's motion. Unanimous in the room. Chad, Tammy, and Riley. Got 3 ayes there. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, private pond rule amendments. I'll turn it back over to Craig Walker if you have any clarification or more details we need there.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In addition to the inclusion of the new community ponds in our proposed regulation changes, I did want to briefly provide some additional information and points of clarification before the RAC discusses our proposed change to the private pond rule. To begin with, I'd like to provide additional information regarding stocking of fish, and I think this is what Kevin alluded to before in his presentation, stocking of fish in private ponds in the Virgin River drainage. In our original proposal presentation, we mentioned that we were in the process of working with the Virgin River Recovery Program to identify additional species for stocking in the Virgin River drainage. The Virgin River Recovery Program consists of several federal, state, and local partners working toward recovery of endangered fishes in the Virgin River drainage. Since recording the presentation, DWR has formalized a new memorandum of understanding with that recovery program. We mentioned in our presentation that once this agreement was completed, it was likely that DWR would propose allowing the stocking of 2 to 4 additional species of fish into private ponds in the Virgin River drainage. Based on our revised agreement with the recovery program, DWR would now like to formally propose allowing the stocking of wiper, black crappie, triploid grass carp, and tiger trout in the Virgin River drainage, in addition to rainbow trout, largemouth bass, and bluegill that are already allowed in private ponds in the drainage. Secondly, I'd like to provide some clarification regarding Utah private aquaculture industry's opportunity to review the private pond rule. During the review process, the Division of Wildlife Resources introduced the proposed rule to the private aquaculture industry ahead of the RAC and Wildlife Board meetings and provided the industry with the opportunity to weigh in on the proposed changes. We did this by providing the rule change as an informational item at a Fish Health Policy Board public meeting. Given that Fish Health Policy Board meetings are the primary forum for Utah's private aquaculture industry to gather and discuss issues within the state, DWR felt that presenting at a board meeting provided the best opportunity to discuss the rule with the industry members. Additionally, representatives from 2 of the 3 established active private aquaculture facilities in Utah attended the meeting when the suggested rule changes were presented, and both expressed support for those modifications at that time. Neither of those industry representatives have expressed concerns since that meeting. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig, for that update. Questions from the RAC members?
Yeah, Craig, could you repeat those species again, those 4 species? I can't write fast enough.
Absolutely. We have wiper, black crappie, triploid grass carp, and tiger trout. And that's in addition to rainbow trout, largemouth bass, and bluegill.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, did I hear you say that 2 out of the 3, does that mean there's 3 private trout producers in the state?
That's correct.
You know historically how many there used to be, like in the late 90s, early 2000?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I think we might have been upwards of 4 or 5, possibly. And due to, I believe, whirling disease, one of those, we ended up with a lesser amount.
Do these producers have to raise sterile trout?
No, in fact, they're not required to raise sterile trout at all. There's ample opportunity to stock fertile trout across the state. We do encourage and require sterile fish to be stocked in areas where we've invested upwards of tens of millions of dollars in cutthroat trout conservation over the past 30 to 40 years. But there's plenty of other areas in the state where fertile trout can be stocked.
By a private producer?
In a private pond, by a private producer, yes.
All right, so you're wanting to change this from what to a Class A misdemeanor? If your fish get away.
So right now we're in a situation where it's probably a little ambiguous as to what the enforceability of the law is. We put some things in there for clarification regarding what we would do in the way of prosecution. Right now, the inclusion of the code language is actually a benefit to the growers. It has, the DWR has to charge growers with a Class A or Class B misdemeanor for any violation. The inclusion of the code language in the rule provides DWR law enforcement, however, with the latitude to apply lesser charges during earlier warnings and infractions, whereas before it was pretty much mandated by code that they had to get a Class A or Class B misdemeanor.
Another question, how long have you been in this position and, you know, over this area and where, have you been in Utah all your life, or is this, kind of give me some history on you?
Sure enough. I've been in Utah for 23 years as a fish biologist, then a fisheries manager, then a fish coordinator, and now an assistant chief of fisheries. So I've kind of worked my way up the ladder. I started off working in Price in the Southeastern region, working with cutthroat trout and native species. Worked through habitat issues as a coordinator, native fish issues as a coordinator in Salt Lake, and then now I'm the assistant chief over Sportfish. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brandon. Any other questions? Seeing none. Questions from the public? Don't have any of those. Public comments. You get some on this agenda item.
We had one again from the Utah Anglers Coalition that was in strongly supported.
Strongly supported. No public comment cards here in the room, so we'll open it up for RAC discussion. Bernard, go ahead.
Okay, the reason I asked how long you've been in that position is because when I moved back from Colorado and previous to that in the 80s, moved back in 88, there were at least 6 private pond, private producers in Lane County. And that doesn't count, I know a couple in Paiute, Sevier County, and And through the years, this whirling disease / non-disease has given you guys in the Department of Ag and Food opportunity to push these guys out of business. And my father and brother-in-law are one of them. And that their trout business was very lucrative, and they've never been tested positive for whirling disease in a private lab, but state of Utah, DWR, Department of Ag have shut down all 6 of these producers for whirling disease, yet both hatcheries, Fremont and the Egan hatchery and the Bicknell Bottoms, has never tested positive for whirling disease. So I wonder where you whittled them down to 3, that they're probably pretty sensitive on what they talk to you about, because they've put everybody else out of business. So, and now you're wanting to put a Class A misdemeanor, which bumps it up from, I don't know what, whatever a Class A is, and I haven't studied all that, but it's the history of the private producer in Utah is one of being regulated out of business. It's a sore spot with me because of my family's put a lot of money into it, and we're just regulated out of business. So I hate to see more regulations, even, we've talked about it before on this RAC with, seems like we're getting more and more regulations on everything, and you guys have a hard time enforcing all these regulations that we come up with. And like a few of us here on this RAC have tried to keep them at a minimum, but you can see where I'm coming. We were producing fish that we hauled out of state to Colorado and to California, and then a few fish out ponds here, but it's pretty much, and we can talk about the PCR test. I've had experience with it in the livestock industry when they told us we couldn't test bulls anymore for trick, and we went to PCR test, and I was nervous. I actually sent in a bull that I observed trick in the sample and sent it in, and they did PCR, and it came back negative. And so I called them and I said, that sample had trick in it when I sent it to you. So then they backed off and they optimized the test, and they finally found it. But the PCR test has hopefully come a lot further than what it was, but I still have a hard time trusting it 100%, like it's pushed and everything. So anyway, when you get putting more regulation on these guys, it seems like you're just wanting to try to run them the rest of the way out. And it's common knowledge that private producers can produce fish a lot cheaper than you guys, DWR. Anyway, that's my comment. I just hate to see more regulations and higher classes of fines or whatever when a flood comes through and your fish get washed away.
Thanks, Vernon. Any other comments or discussion from the RAC?
I related to Berlin's comment here, I thought it was already a Class A misdemeanor, and we just were putting it in regulation, or did I miss something? Maybe law enforcement can help us with that.
Craig, do you want to answer that if you're able?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, it was already a Class A misdemeanor. The problem was that the way that things were written in code and rule, those two things did not jibe. First and foremost, this was an effort to make sure that those two things did jibe, to make sure that this was enforceable from a law enforcement standpoint. And it allowed us to put language in there, as I mentioned, that did not have an initial trigger for a misdemeanor. It allowed law enforcement to go in and actually have some flexibility on first-time infractions, warnings, that type of thing, rather than just instantly jump into a Class A misdemeanor situation, as I understand it.
Just another clear comment there, and really I understand the history and the frustration there. But the reality of this rule change is actually reducing regulation, it's adding species. It's identifying when, at times when a private pond, when there's no permit or COR even required. This is a move that's removing restrictions and moving back towards the direction that that I think you would prefer to see. But again, I understand the industry was a lot different 30 years ago than it is now, and understand your comments. So.
Yeah, and I fully understand where you're coming from there. I think that we're in a situation right now, as Kevin mentioned, where what we tried to do here was, I mean, we're not in an adversarial relationship with our growers in the state. In the long game, we're probably going to need to partner with our growers in the state on some fronts to provide the fish that we need. But right now, we have a situation where primarily private growers for cold water species, trout specifically, are providing those fish to private pond owners. This rule is designed to make it easier for private pond owners to discern what they can and cannot stock where in the state, making for better ease of use when they're going out and securing a permit for their pond. It gives what I view as our partners in the private growers greater ability to sell fish, as Kevin mentioned. There isn't a requirement for sterility. There are areas where we do require sterile fish species, yes, where we have invested millions of dollars in cutthroat conservation, but there's ample opportunity to stock diploid fish, fertile fish across the state. And the third thing is that we have greater enforceability now. And with that enforceability, we feel that we have greater protection against integration, the introduction of fertile fish into areas where we have cutthroat trout concerns.
Thank you, Craig. Tammy, go ahead.
Yeah, to Verlin's point, I want to ask the question, is there going to be room for growth and adding new growers in the private sector as well? I'm always partial to the little guy and the ag side of things. And so is there going to be opportunity in the future to add new growers?
Yes, that is a definite. What species are going to be possible is probably going to change. We're struggling with it internally right now, having some really tough conversations about what our hatchery system is going to be producing in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years as groundwater dwindles, as water temperatures warm, and our ability to stock trout specifically in certain waters kind of is going by the wayside. Similarly, I think we're looking to partner with private growers moving forward to stock warm and cool water species that the Division of Wildlife Resources needs. So yes, I think that partnership can be forged moving forward.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more? Sorry, let me just do a follow through. So what would be the process and maybe the timeline in looking into that kind of stuff? And where would someone start with that? Because I realize that Wayne County, like he said, we had one in Beaver County as well years ago. And, you know, they did very well until they didn't. And so is there going to be opportunity for those guys? And what kind of timeline or process is that going to take to come back into the business?
Sure. Any one of the fish producers we're going to work with in the future do have to adhere to the same fish health standards that we adhere to, right? We're not going to jeopardize the management, conservation, and recovery of fish in Utah simply to make a business deal. That's not the game we're in. However, we do recognize that we have a valuable partner in private growers, specifically because they have water and they have space, something that is a limited commodity in Utah, something that the Division of Wildlife Resources has a limited opportunity to produce with in our 12 or 13 facilities that we have across the state. So the process would look like us getting together, coming up with a list of species that we are looking to produce, specifically rear, grow out, if you will, prior to stocking, and sitting down with growers and talking through that. What does that look like in the long term? What do they have in the way of water temperatures? What do they have in the way of cubic feet per second? How much flow do they have? How many pounds can they raise? How many fish can they raise? And trying to mate the two. We're actually in a conversation right now with Ryan Christensen down in Newcastle, who's been growing wiper for us for, gosh, almost 10 years now. But we now are producing wiper ourselves, and we're looking to pivot and move forward with him rearing alternate species. In fact, I have to have that list to him next Tuesday. So, yeah, there's room for us to partner with private growers as long as we're working together to address the management, conservation, and recovery needs of the state for our fish.
Thank you, Craig. Any other comments or discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Chuck, go ahead.
Motion that we accept the proposal of the regulation for private ponds as proposed by the state.
Motion by Chuck to accept private pond rule amendments as presented. And a second. Gus seconds that. Got it. All right, we'll call for a vote. Those here in the room, please signify. If you're in favor of the motion on the table. 5 in favor, 1 opposed. We'll go online. Tammy, Chad, Riley, 3 in favor. That's 8 in favor, 1 opposed. Motion passes. Berlin, would you like to explain any more than you have on your reason to vote against the motion?
Oh, it's just that more regulation, I guess, just the wording, whatever it is, to make the Class A misdemeanor stick easier. That's just what I don't like. Plus what historically what's happened with the DWR, food, how they've gone hand in hand and put so many people out of business.
Thank you for that. Okay. That ends this agenda. Thank you, Craig, for joining us this evening on those agenda items.
Thank you all. Appreciate you.
We will make an announcement for our next, that ends our agenda for tonight, but our next Regional Advisory Council meeting will be November 14th at 6 p.m. and that'll be held in Cedar City. Yeah, there will be no meetings in October. So I hope everybody gets out and enjoys the fall. And we will have some unit plans at that next RAC meeting. So it'll be a good one. Appreciate everybody who's volunteered their time and our new members here on the RAC, and look forward to serving with all of you. So we'll accept the motion to adjourn.
I'll just say for the benefit of our new RAC members, they probably already know, but the next meeting will have a much longer agenda and will last a lot longer than this one. It'll be focused on big game, and that's always our meetings that garner the most public input, which is why we have these meetings. And so we'll take our time to gather that input and work through it. So,
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so your first meeting was pretty blah. The next meeting, we expect fireworks.
It was a good training run for you guys.
Okay. Good job, Austin.
Tammy, would you like to make a motion for us to adjourn?
Yeah, I make a motion to adjourn.
Perfect. I'm sure everyone will second that. Perfect. Hey, thank you.
Have a great
See you
night all.
guys.
Take care.
okay, before we end the meeting, let me just, Sherry, did you get all of the motions, and are we in good shape from a minute standpoint? Okay, go ahead, Denise. You're muted, Denise. Denise, you need to unmute if you have a question for us.
She might be trying to leave and just raised her hand accidentally.
I will clarify anything with her tomorrow. We'll call Austin if we need anything else, but.
Don't have a microphone.
Oh, what do we got? We don't have a microphone. We have everything. Okay, so no, we're good. Okay, thank you.
Everyone.
Go vote if you haven't.